Hi there folks, this is Chris. I need to do this because I've just given myself the dry heaves once more. This week's episode has some mention, well, drugs, of course, but also self-harm and a really, really disgusting story. I mean, really disgusting story. So, if you're not feeling it, give it a skip. We do give you a warning when it's coming up, so you'll also be able to skip forward a few minutes there if you really don't fancy it. I'm away to stick my head in the toilet again. Enjoy the show.
Hey folks, welcome to the Song Podcast. I'm Mark.
I am Bill Murray.
Bill Murray.
Yeah, we're in Groundhog Day. What episode is this?
355.
But we know that there's a lot more than that when you factor in.
The main line is 3 in the master continuity.
I wonder what Bill Murray was doing by day 355 of Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I wonder. Do you think he was in Groundhog Day for years?
Aye. I think that's the implication, right?
I was saying it, to be fair.
Oh man, you should watch that regularly.
I should.
Every day, really.
Every day.
Just set your alarm,
time.
man. Just wake up and put a Bob Dylan or whatever. No, who is it? I Got You Babe, Sonny and Cher.
Aye.
Yeah, bit of that in the morning.
So this week we are part 2 of our
Wildhearts.
I almost said Earth Hearts there. I don't know what that's all about. Of our Wildhearts.
Earth versus Wild versus the Earth Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
This is our analysis of the album Fishing for Luckies. Which may be controversial to members of the Wildhearts more so than it is fans of the Wildhearts, because I think it's a fucking good record. I think that's pretty objectively true, but the band are really not comfy with it because they see it as a bit of a record company cash-in. On the episode last week, you should go back and listen to that. We introduced the band, including the very revered, what they call definitive lineup of the early years, which actually, certainly for the first part of their career, only recorded one album together. And we talked a bit about where they were from, but Ginger Bean and Choir Boys, but how the band didn't exactly get on very well very often, about some considerable acrimony between the members that kind of led to an unpredictability and instability is maybe a better way to put it around the band, which I would certainly say is to blame for their lack of penetration to a higher level. I don't think they were lacking much musically, apart from maybe a couple of really, really big songs. We'll talk about that as we go here. But yeah, a very, very well received for the first 2 albums, Earth vs. Wildhearts and Fuck, or PHUQ, depending on what rating your podcast has. And then the record label had rejected a bunch of tracks from PHUQ, which was meant to be a double album, and then decided, oh no, the band have put that out to their fans and it's gone down quite well, we should release it and make some money. Which is understandably why the band don't feel too warmly towards that collection. It went through a couple of iterations, and in 1996 was released with some new tracks added to it. This is where we left off in the last episode. That is the record, that is the specific release that I have singled out here. I will unpack and elaborate upon at the end of the episode. What we are going to do is we're going to batter through some more of their discography, including some stop-offs at some mental anecdotes. This is a band that really live up to their name, as we said in the first episode. Probably masters their own downfall in a lot of cases. Mark, we were talking about you had tried to get into them and it never really clicked back in the day.
Yep.
I got hugely into Fishing for Luckies. I don't even know where I first heard it. I just got massively into it and then tried to get into their earlier stuff, and that just didn't click for me at all. So I think Yeah, we both kind of bounced off them in different ways. How do you feel about their catalogue from Fishing for Luckies onwards? Give me 3 words.
Surprisingly okay. It's 2 words.
You could have said mate.
It's surprisingly okay. It's surprisingly okay.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm actually quite curious to hear this now. So we left off at the point where they released Fishing for Luckies in 96, the one that they don't like but that I very much do. We will come back to that. What followed in 1997 was a record called Endless Nameless. If you're a Nirvana fan, you will recognise that as being the title that was sort of retroactively applied to the secret track on Nevermind. Which is in itself pretty much pure rock chaos. It's a kind of destruction jam at the end. It was a studio session they were doing it, but I mean they used to do it live all the time. Where they would just trash the kit. And it was interesting to me at the time that they'd chosen that. I was a massive Nirvana fan, and that immediately pricked my ears up again. I was like, oh, they know about Nirvana, they're into Nirvana, why are they picking that? So I went and investigated this album. To set the scene, Ginger's comments on this album: nobody likes this album, I fucking love this album. So we were referring in the first episode to a series of videos that Ginger did on his YouTube channel, which you can obviously go and check out. It has the worst and most grating ident I've ever seen on a YouTube channel, but there's some pretty good stuff on there, and he comes across really pretty well in it. Go back and listen to the first episode for us to qualify that. But in that show, in those 3 episodes, he kind of rates their albums in order of preference, and this one is actually 3rd of all their albums for him, which is highly controversial, I think, because this is one that the fans of the band didn't respond to warmly at all. Ginger has elaborated. He said, we just came off the AC/DC tour, the band was falling apart, everybody was taking different drugs, and if we'd all been taking the same drugs, it would probably have been a bit more commercial. Danny McCormack can't remember anything about this album, and Ginger says that is because when he was actually at the studio, he was asleep on the couch. So apparently there's not actually much bass on this album at all. The bass was played by Jeff, who in Ginger's words played more bass than he played guitar on this, and Ginger has said that it was him and Rich Battersby who made this happen, which was the case for a couple of things, but they really dragged this project to completion. In terms of the way, I mean, it's very, very different sonically from every single thing that he's released prior. He's justified that, saying that he was very into industrial music and had been listening to a lot of dance music as well, and wanted to try and combine those with noise rock. Did I read a comment? No, or maybe I saw him do it in an interview. He said Foo Fighters had just come out with a song called Monkey Range, and I fucking hated it. Who wants to listen to this? Well, obviously I was very fucking wrong. And he describes Endless Nameless as a guerrilla style attack on rock music. Dislikers are still very much in the majority, but the conversation is ongoing at least. And he kind of goes back to that theme quite frequently, that he likes the idea that it just provokes discussion, even if it's not entirely, even the majority of it is frankly quite negative. During the recording, I mean, as part of the process, they used D-drums to try and, they synthesised drum sounds. I mean, the drum tones on it are pretty mental. One of them, he says, they tried to imitate the sound of a truck falling off a building and used that as a snare drum sound. He has said that inventing the drum sounds for this album, specifically inventing the drum sounds, is one of the most magical creative experiences he's ever had. He said he had a great time in the studio doing that. He loves the fact that people didn't get it and still don't. I mean, I don't know if he's putting a positive spin on it. I'm sure they would have loved it to be a smash hit, but he does take a bit of glee from the fact that it really doesn't sit well with some folks. Yeah, he's referred to the fact that on this album they used that kind of like depth charge bass sound that became a really big feature of dubstep. And folk were like, what the fuck is that? Like absolutely mental levels of sub on it. Yeah, so he thinks they're innovators in that capacity. He sees it as an artistic statement much more than a kind of musical album, and that it was a real adventure. And yeah, and he thinks, and I agree with him in this, it sounds very cohesive as a record, which is one of the main criticisms of the records that he doesn't like, is that they just weren't albums. They were collections, they were thrown together, they were money grabs. This was a concerted effort, a discrete studio project, and it is, for better or worse, it sounds fucking extreme. What are your thoughts on this album?
I can totally understand why the artist would like this piece of art they've created, right? It has a just fuck it all and burn it down kind of energy to it. You know, it really does feel almost like outsider art as much as it can be, but there's still the DNA of the Wildhearts in it. You know, the anthem has the core, the song anthem, has the core Wildhearts sound. Yeah. All the elements of the core Wildhearts sound, rather, I should say. But just like it's been put through an industrial shredder. You know, but it's still got the hooks. It's still got the backing vocals. You know, it's still got the big guitars and stuff like that. All the parts are there. They're just rearranged or maybe scattered.
There is a real subversiveness if you consider it when you're talking about outsider art. They were not an outsider band.
No, it's got that feel to it though.
But
you know?
Yeah, I would say it qualifies to some extent because they were a band that were still very much fancied as being a potential big time band. This is only their fourth record, and technically in their minds it's actually only their third record. Their first two albums had done well. They were touring well. They were on good supports. Yes, the lineup was inconsistent, but it wasn't yet a pattern really, because it was still early days for that. So to take a gamble like this at such an early stage, it's probably another significant reason why they didn't jump up a level. It's, I mean, fourth album, when you've done pretty well with the others, it's a key moment. Can you keep it going? And
you've just toured with AC/DC.
Yeah.
What you should be doing is coming off the back of that and writing the big record, you know?
Yeah.
And capitalising on that.
Yeah, exactly. And they did the exact opposite. Now, I have to agree with many people that whilst it definitely isn't the best record in terms of tunes, because frankly, as you said about Anthem, the tunes are crushed to a pulp by the manner of the delivery. It is a very interesting work of art. It's very provocative. It's designed to be very challenging. They were monged out their fucking brains and took maybe a slightly foolhardy decision, but they went with it, stuck with it. To me, this album actually sounds a lot like I imagine Being in the Wildhearts sounds. There's such a band of excess. There's so much chaos. There was that mixture of rock and a sense of daze. You know, there's so many times that people are like, I can't remember this, I can't remember that. Oh, I woke up in a hospital, all that. This album sounds like that to me. This sounds like the hedonism and the mania and the kind of turbo-driven fucking circus of being in the Wildhearts in those early days.
It also sounds like a band coming apart as well.
Yes,
you know,
fair.
Which is maybe obviously wasn't the desired outcome at the time, but it was supposed to be a deconstruction of sorts.
Yeah.
You know.
So chronologically speaking, the next album they released was in 1998. It was called Landmines and Pantomimes, and this was dead last in Ginger's list of their own releases. He says it literally means nothing to him and he hasn't even heard it all the way through. The tracks on it were written intermittently, basically whenever possible during the tour with AC/DC. He said he'd be like sitting in the corners of rooms trying to like put ideas down and stuff. They recorded demos, which isn't something they did very often. He said some of the demos were actually okay and he felt they showed some promise. but the label basically compiled and released them along with a bunch of assorted bits and bobs, and he was just like, what the fuck is going on? He reckons it is, quote, a pile of shit. I do wonder if the label saw the writing on the wall and was like, this band is not going to last much longer, let's just try and recoup and release what we've got. And devil's advocate, that might not be the stupidest idea they ever had, albeit the band are not happy about that. As a record, it's pretty forgettable.
Yeah, it feels as though there's no care.
Well, I think that specifically isn't any care,
and
it was thrown together by committee.
That comes through, and you know. I think one of the things the Wildhearts, or the best Wildhearts record, have is that they feel as though they've been put together with love and dedication and passion. You know, even Endless Nameless.
Yeah.
It feels as though it's been put together by somebody that actually is enjoying the process.
Yeah, they very much were, eh?
Yeah.
Maybe over enjoying the process at times. So again, chronologically, there's a bit of a gap here, but chronologically, what was released next were both Riff After Riff in 2002 and a collection called Coupled With in 2004. And Ginger kind of groups these together as his number 11 out of 14. These were sort of similar collections that were released for different territories. For example, one in Japan, one in the USA. He said it was a really prolific writing period, and there were loads of new ideas flying about, loads of B-sides. That was, again, we talked about that, how many records, the singles they would release for each record, and loads of B-sides as a result of that. I think one of them, maybe Coupled With, was released in America and therefore became a bit of a touchstone for American audiences. They went on tour in the USA actually with The Darkness at this time. At some point they went into the studio to record more for one of these. I don't know if it was maybe the second one, and he said it was the first time they'd actually gone into a studio without having songs written. He just decided, let's go into a studio and write on the spot, and they did, and was actually pretty happy with some of the results of that. It does feature a song, Cheers, which got mad amounts of airplay, even over here. I mean, it is to date, I think, up there with their most played songs. Chris Evans played it every day on Radio 1, saying that he'd only stop playing it in the morning once the public put it in the charts. And as Ginger said, but no cunt ever bought it. But, you know, fair play to Chris Evans for trying.
Yeah.
Mark, how's your stomach?
It's alright, aye.
This brings me to a thing that I've headed here: marshmallows and UFOs. Fuck it, give me the... I'm getting that wet mouth thing.
Do you want me to do it?
Oh man, no, it's okay. So this is around about the time they were playing with Manic Street Preachers. That was apparently a really, really significant tour for them. Solidified them as a band, as Ginger says.
They would have been huge, Manics, at that point as well.
Yeah.
Enormous.
He's quoted as saying it, there was always blood around at that time. Somebody was always bleeding. I'm just going to... You put a trigger warning here, right? If you get easily grossed out, or indeed if you don't like discussion of self-harm, maybe skip 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about people always cutting themselves. I'm sure most members of the audience have seen, you know, pictures of Richie Edwards, for example, with
For real
carved into his arm.
Oh, what an idiot.
Yeah, and so there seemed to be a lot of that going on. Fuck knows why. Ginger is pretty marked up though. He's a very heavily tattooed guy. Mm-hmm. And on one of the tours, in one of the interviews he gives, in fact, no, it's on that video clip. It is. He points to, I think, below his bicep, or is it his upper forearm?
It's on his inside wrist.
Inside his kind of upper forearm.
No, lower forearm.
Well, what I mean, no, it's like it's up near the elbow on the lower arm. So he's got a fish tattoo, and he's got that because he'd cut really deep in his arm, and then realised he was going to meet his mum a couple of days later and didn't want her seeing it. So he cuts really deep in his arm, and he said the blood was flooding out his arm. And fuck me, it's so disgusting. I'm going to just try and say it quite quickly. He talks about the wee bits of fat being like little marshmallows coming out his arm, and that started to really freak him out.
Because he cut down on the muscle.
Oh, man. And and so he got that closed up not very professionally, and then decided I need to get this tattooed before my mum sees it. So he went to a tattoo parlour a day before he was meeting his mum and was like, see this bit here, man, sorry, it's healing up, it's pretty thin, but could you tattoo around it? And this guy, this big burly biker tattooist that he'd got to do it, was like, yeah, sure, no bother, I'll do that. And he starts tattooing it and gets to that bit and the arm splits open, and in Ginger's words, all these little marshmallows start to come out again. Fuck, it's so disgusting, man. It's so disgusting.
Yeah.
Oh, all these little marshmallows start to come out, which is the fat and he says that this fucking massive biker tattoo guy just starts whiteying everywhere when he sees it, just like retching. And I'm not fucking surprised. So let's move on for this fucking story, man.
But he did finish the tattoo.
He did finish the tattoo, and fuck knows, maybe Ginger's mum's blind as a bat. But
that's not going to be on our TikTok, by the way, because we'll get our account closed for that story. But yeah, wow.
Yeah.
If you can see our faces now.
Oh man, my mouth feels just so wet right now. It's disgusting. Anyway, yeah. So
anyway,
fucking hell. Sorry, the first part of the anecdote is just too hardcore for us to put on here. But if you're listening on TikTok right now, but the second part of that anecdote is about them being in Seattle. You know about this one?
Yeah,
and they meet two ex-sailors, nutters apparently. One of them called Tattoo, some fucking name, and a guy called Murphy. And they get absolutely mad with it in Seattle, and they decide to board a plane to Mexico while they're on a bender. And then on the plane never takes off because they're so out of control that they have to stop the takeoff and throw the band, or the two guys in the band, and Murphy and Tattoo off the plane. And Ginger is like, yeah, so turns out that Tattoo's a bit of a diplomat and manages to talk them down and avoid them getting arrested by the cops who were waiting for them to come off the plane. Don't know how they managed that, but he convinces them to get into a hotel, and so they all go to this hotel near LAX airport and start drinking heroic amounts of margaritas. And then it seems that somewhere at some point in the night in the hotel room, they start mass hallucinating UFOs out of the window. I mean, they're obviously they're opposite a fucking airport. And he's like, oh, but it definitely wasn't planes. It's like, right, first of all, you're high as fuck, you're wasted, all of you, and you're looking out at a situation that is covered with lights and floodlights and runways and aircraft, and you're honestly telling me you expect that to be a credible fucking UFO story. But anyway, he says there's some big ball that stops in front of their hotel window and then shoots upwards, and they all see it. And it does kind of seem like Ginger has a bit of a thing for glowing orbs. Did you notice this in any interviews?
No.
He mentions it a lot, because literally in that thing in his channel where he's talking about the albums, he stops during it and says, oh, I think a glowing orb just passed me. And then he says that, glowing orbs are a thing in his life that he sees pretty regularly.
Okay.
By the way, apparently they did eventually get to Mexico, and it was, quote, fucking insane. On that subject of UFOs, yeah, as I say, he mentioned during that video that the house I live in is supposed to be haunted. I don't believe in that ghost business. He then goes on to say, but there's definitely something going on. There's some kind of energy, and orbs are definitely a thing. I think he made a quote in a later interview where he says that time isn't linear, and we just think so because we are limited to 3 dimensions. I think you'll find that's 4, because time is a dimension. But yet he also believes that when something clicks in your life, when a bit of music or a film or just a moment clicks, it's because your future self, which is on the same condensed piece of time, is trying to flag something up to you. Wildhearts have done an awful lot of drugs in their lives, and it sometimes manifests in their interviews, bless them.
Oh, you know, everyone's got a hang.
You ever see any glowing orbs?
No.
You need to do more drugs and write more rock songs, Mark. Anyway,
I would love to do both those things.
They then release, well, it's a fair gap, but in 2003 they bring out The Wildhearts Must Be Destroyed.
He's taking the chair, he's living the life, he's fucking pretty girls every night, but he ain't fucking the wife, and he's doing the things that we will never do, and he's genuine, judging by the size of his crew, with the face at the eye can easily digest, he's down with the big boys.
Number 9 of 14 in Ginger's list, kind of very mid-table. He accepts a lot of people think this album is too poppy. This album is too poppy. The production is pretty thirsty.
Stuck in the memory and the nights in doubt. need somebody friendly when the lights go out. I ain't too crazy about Elvis, but I'm sure
He has some mixed feelings about it. He was touring, I think he was touring Europe and the USA with the Darkness as well when they were doing this. He says it's a bit bittersweet. The demos that they did for it, he feels much more warmly towards them because, first of all, they turned out better, and by the time they re-recorded them for the album, he thinks they didn't sound as good. But also it's a bit to do with the atmosphere around the band at the time. Danny didn't take part in it due to wellness. He basically didn't turn up in the studio, so Ginger did bass. Danny took exception to that and said if that happened then he wasn't going to be doing the shows. They got John Poole to do the bass for this one, a reliable guy obviously. They actually toured midway through doing this album, and that was a scheduled thing, which is not a good...
It's a bad idea.
Yeah, it's not good for consistency of the project. He said that when he finished the last gig of the entire tour, the bus took him directly to the studio so he could redo the vocals for Vanilla Radio. I mean, even for somebody that lives a sane life, that would be fucking exhausting. He said he got to the studio and he was like, oh, this place is different from the last time I was here. When did you put up all of these giant curtains? And the engineer is like, what curtains? And he's like, all these giant curtains. And then the engineer's like, Ginger, there's no curtains in that room. And then he said the curtains started falling and then he started sinking into the floor and had effectively a total exhaustion-led nervous breakdown. I think there was actually a series of things, but he doesn't remember it really. He says he just woke up sometime later in hospital, and I don't know if he was sectioned or if he was just in there under his own auspices. I'm not sure. In terms of the album, I don't particularly like the sound of it. It's got some interesting bits in it. There's a track in it called Only Love, which has a proper 70s classic rock feel to it.
it's only love that keeps you going when you're far away. It's only love and it keeps on growing deeper every day.
What's your take on it?
I remember when I first listened to it, I initially felt it was maybe one of their strongest records, but I do agree that the production is a bit rubbish. It just feels like it's got no weight, you know, too much shine. But I think a lot of the time the record sounds like a heavier Guns N' Roses playing Cheap Trick songs.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Or maybe that's like, or maybe in some places like it's like Moorhead playing Cheap Trick.
I think that's where I hear the classic rock thing, that kind of Cheap Trick aspect to it.
Yeah, Nexus Icon's not a bad. It's not a bad song. It's got a good pace to it. But it does have a whiff of the status quo. Vanilla Radio is probably the best song here, and maybe one of their best songs, period, I think.
Well, you said that was one that you remembered when you
My Elvish Ways is what I hear. Where's my Elvis? But I hear My Elvish Ways. But the rest of the record is just fairly rudimentary.
Yeah.
You know, I did actually kind of admire the kind of thrashy song and Get Your Groove On, but it feels toothless as well, you know.
A wee bit token, innit?
Yeah, I enjoy a DB and I enjoy like riffy stuff, and it's less than 2 minutes long, which, by the way, one thing I haven't said yet, most Wildhearts songs are far fucking too long. They don't need to be 4 or 5 minutes long. Since
the early days where they managed to avoid that, it's been an increasing feature, innit?
But even some of the songs that are the good songs, like I Want to Go Where the People Go, it's just too long for me. But I'm a punk kid. I like brevity. This is well known on the podcast. And then there are some egregious examples across the records, which we will get to.
We actually talked about this in Ink and Dagger a couple of weeks ago. Like the Ink and Dagger were another band that had so many ideas that the songs just ended up stretching out because they wanted to cram more and more of these ideas into them.
Yeah.
Wildhearts are guilty of the exact same thing. They had so many ideas, so many riffs, so many wee novelty bits that they just really struggled to be ruthless.
Yeah.
I mean, I did describe that was actually something I took away from them, for better or worse, is that for a long period when I was writing the songs, I was putting far too much in them, and I think a large part of that came from how much I liked what they did on things like Fishing for Luckies. But you're right, it doesn't necessarily make for great singles. It can get tiresome, especially if the audience is already, you're trying to win them over. Well, you need to win them over pretty fast before you start taking liberties.
Yeah.
2007, the Wildhearts, the eponymous album, also known as the White Album, by fans. Ginger put this as number 6 out of his 14 records. Kind of likes it, has certain reservations. They did the basics in the studio and then went to do the overdubs in Tutbury Castle, which is, quote, the most haunted castle in Europe, according to the people that were charging to rent it out, I'm sure. He said the other band members weren't actually there for very much of it. They did bits, but they weren't like socialising really. But there were a lot of loved ones around at the time, lots of friends and family dropping in and out, and said they actually had tons of fun on this project, so it's fondly remembered. Where the problems maybe start is he financed the whole thing, he self-financed it for a self-release and kind of botched it. He does like the songs that are on it, but didn't get the release right. The whole album, by the way, is supposed to be quite noisy. I think they'd kind of conceived of it as a cross between Earth versus the Wildhearts and Endless Nameless, but apparently when Rich came back in, he did the drums again and he did them clean. They'd originally been recorded quite gainy and quite kind of full signal saturated, but the drums got really cleaned up, and so he doesn't feel that the drums sit well in the mix now because the other instruments are quite full on. I think like the first track in it, for example, Rooting for the Bad Guy, is an interesting one to look at. It's a total epic of a song. Again, I think it's like 8 minutes, 8 minutes something long. For fans of the show, or people that are on our record club, you may recognise the band Leto from Dundee. This is massive Leto vibes in a way that I really did not expect to find on a Wildhearts record. I'm not very familiar with this album, and this
not on Spotify.
Not on Spotify, but also it's just one that was in a period of their career where I was just kind of tuned out and looking at other things. The way it blends, kind of classic Iron Maiden with some snappier alternative stuff is really quite interesting. Around the 6 minute mark, for example, in this one, you could be listening to the Leto 3 record. It is really good.
It's a good metal bit, that. Yeah.
Aye.
I've highlighted this song as well.
Yeah, as I say, I confess to not being very familiar with it, but I have a feeling it could actually be a bit of a grower now that I've listened to it. Yeah, we've spoken about first exposure bias in the show in the past, when that phenomenon where the first album you hear by a band tends to colour your view of it. In retrospect, you're not exactly objective about it. I kind of get the feeling that had I come to this album first with this band, it would maybe be up there. It could well be an unsung classic, and in fact I'm sure Ginger agrees with that way more than he agrees with my actual choice for this show. But yeah, it's got a lot going for it, actually. I think it probably really merits a bit of extended listening on my part.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Slaughtered Daughters was really good. Big chorus, huge wall of guitars. A really well written song, but it's just far too fucking long. It's 8 minutes 30. It has multiple sections. Rooting for the Bad Guy's the same. Like, why are you doing this? Just keep it succinct. Get in, get out. Just answer no questions. Just leave no bodies.
So do you know about the Ipswich Ripper thing?
No.
So let's be clear. Ginger spins a good yarn, alright? I'm not sure if there are any embellishments in this, but there's a good chance, but it's still good value, alright? So they started out with regards to the eponymous album as a full band, writing, rehearsing together for this album, so they had to be in one place. And originally they were all in a house in Ipswich for the original tracking and practicing and stuff. And Ginger's words, we're all in a house in Ipswich, there's some ripper going on, not the Yorkshire Ripper, but another ripper. It turned out, I had a wee look at this, right? It's 5 murders in 2006 that were committed by the Suffolk Strangler. His real name was Steve Wright. Anyway, Ginger continues, and we'd moved into this house in the area that this was going on, and he says it's totally offhand. You know, we crashed the car one day. Me and Scott went to the off licence and drove the car through a bunch of fucking trees and into another field. I do want to point out, another field, i.e. they were already in a field in the car, which may be a bad start if you're in a car. It's just, pointing out the obvious here. Anyway, he says, we went to the police station, and as soon as we got to the station, they locked all the doors and they figured, we've got the Ripper. There must be two of them because these guys don't look like the locals. And he reckons they only finally opened the doors because, in his words, they looked like killers and they couldn't be killers because killers never look like killers.
Top detective work there for the Ipswich PD.
And again, I don't want to be the eternal cynic here, but bear in mind that Ginger is telling this story wearing a Grease t-shirt with cat ears and dreadlocks. Ginger, that's not what killers look like, mate. I'm sorry.
Or is it?
No, but the thing is, in fairness, Steve Wright, the actual Suffolk Strangler, was about as basic looking an English bloke as you could possibly find. Looks like he plays darts and you'd see him with a pint of fucking John Smith's. You know, he does not look like Ginger.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, it sounds like it was a colourful trip anyway.
Yes, it does.
So, 2008, they brought out Stop Us, if you've heard this one before, Volume 1, although I think we can drop that now, seeing as it's not been followed by anything. This is 13 of 14 in Ginger's list, which I kind of get why, because it's just covers. It's just covers of songs with no particular unifying theme other than that they felt like doing something that was fun. I mean, musically, it deserves to be much higher because they're exceptionally well executed covers to the point where the tones, I mean, in particular the Helmet and the Fugazi cover, the tones are remarkably similar, like really, really well observed. Now, he says it was an excuse just to go and enjoy themselves. They just picked random tracks that they liked. There was no particular concept. It includes the track Unsung, which gave this podcast its name. They apparently did it all in a rehearsal studio. I believe he made a comment as well that the band that were next to them were the loudest band that he'd ever heard, but they still managed to get it done. It's an eclectic mix of artists. I do want to say something that blew my mind, and I almost couldn't believe it when I saw it. The first track is AC Rocket. That's by a Scottish band called Foil. And nobody knows about Foil apart from me, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, they had two albums. I don't know where they're from. I don't know if it was Fife or it was out towards Edinburgh somewhere. I really fucking liked Foil. I read about them in Kerrang. I think they came out around about the same time as Idlewild were appearing back in the day.
So please don't raise your voice and cause a scene. My head is clear, my slate is clean. What do you want that I should have a thousand reasons?
But they were great, really good. I remember seeing them at the 13th Note. They weren't even headlining that show. Never really, in my book, got the credit they deserved. But yeah, I mean, covering Foil, that was brilliant. I was really impressed with that. 2009, they bring out an album called Chutzpah. How do you pronounce that?
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah.
Yeah.
Chutzpah.
Yep, chutzpah.
What language is it?
I think it's a Jewish word.
Is it Yiddish? Is it?
I think it might be.
It's not Hebrew, is it? Anyway, Ginger has said, this is, first of all, it's number 7 in his list, so it's bang mid-table again. Said it was a terrible time in his life personally. I think it was recorded in Denmark and he was extremely homesick during it. Apparently the band turned up to the studio and whatever band it was who'd been in ahead of them had absolutely trashed the place. Like, it was unusable. So he decided that they would just trash it even worse. And in his words, turned everything into matchwood. They had nowhere to sleep because they'd fucked the place up so badly. Yeah, he said he spent a lot of time in what remained of the studio with the producer while the other guys took bikes to the pub. He said the track listing is poor. And his favourite songs went on to be included in something called Chutzpah Jr., some kind of other collection. Fans of the band didn't really like the sound of it.
These are the words that I've saved for the perfect day, but they won't get used if I keep waiting on you.
Although I do think the band had gone for it on purpose, I don't particularly like the sound of it. Yeah, and cue one full decade before they do anything else after that.
Yeah, the only one's a good song.
So open your eyes and see where I'm standing. Straighten your line aside, so you should make up your mind. Do what it is that you need to.
It's got Scott Sorry on vocals, which gives it a slightly different feel.
So he played in Amen, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I think the Wildhearts played with Amen.
He did,
Mazel Tov Cocktail is a big AC/DC style riff at the start, and it's actually got a 4 to the floor beat in the intro as well. Another strong chorus in that, but yeah, it's a fairly identikit Wildhearts record.
So yeah, as I say, it's a decade before their next recording. However, in the interim, there's a particular anecdote of note that we should touch on from Download Festival. Ginger actually related this as part of a kind of mini video series that Download Festival actually did called Onstage Nightmares. It just so happens that he picked a Download Festival for his Onstage Nightmare from 2014. He also, by the way, points out that it is a career highlight for pure novelty value. So the band were confirmed to play at Download Festival. They hadn't played in ages, and they didn't know if they even had enough material in 2014, because they basically been out of action for 5 years, at least in terms of studio stuff. They needed a 40-minute set. That was a contract, but they only had 30 minutes of music, and so they were a bit...
How? Do you get how many records?
Whoever was in the band was not rehearsed.
That's a poor show from the Wildhearts, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, isn't something I would have accused them of too often, but yeah. So they're a bit anxious about how they're going to deal with this, but they just decide, fuck it, man, we might need to like improvise and jam and stretch this shit out, even if people don't take it too well. But they got really fucking lucky. Ginger had been, reflecting on kind of old school festivals where it was just standard for bottles of piss to fly through the air. And he started kind of goading the crowd just for a bit of a laugh. Like, I think it was, if it's not bolted down, I want you to throw it up on stage. And I think part of it was to distance themselves from a few acts that had thrown really public tantrums in recent times. I think it was 50 Cent was one of them. The Rasmus were maybe another, where something had been thrown on stage and they just, toys were out the pram and that was them, they were done. So Ginger's like telling this crowd of, I think it was like between 10 and 15,000 people watching them at Download, right, just get it launched up here. And he said they fucking leaned right into it. I mean, they ended up with all sorts. Toilet seats got thrown up on stage, which presumably were bolted down.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he saw one guy hang up his phone from a call and then throw the phone up.
That can't be true. I love it, but it can't be true.
Told you he likes to spin a yarn. And he also said that apparently someone launched an egg at them. First of all, he does say, where the fuck did they get an egg? At a festival? That somebody launched an egg at them. And he caught it coming out the corner of his eye, and he thought it was a rock. So he actually caught it, and he says, I have no idea how I managed to catch an egg without breaking it, because it must have come from like 100 feet away. But he catches this egg in midair thinking it's something heavy, and he's like, oh, it's fucking egg. So he tosses it down onto the stage, but then the egg like burst on the stage.
It's an egg, yeah.
The stage, it does an egg thing, and it burst on the stage and immediately makes the stage like a fucking skating rink, which is like a total health and safety nightmare. So you get fucking shoes, phones, bottles, glasses, bits of clothing, toilet seats,
eggs,
food. The stage is getting absolutely fucking destroyed by this stuff. He said also, looking out, word had got round of what was going on, and the crowd went from maybe about 15,000 to the best part of 80,000 as folk came just to see this hail of shit getting thrown at the stage. Apparently at one point he looked up and they were near an airport. He said he saw a plane taking off and he's like, fucking hell, someone's throwing a fucking plane at us. But no, eventually the organisers pulled the plug and it let them off the hook with 10 minutes of material that they didn't actually have rehearsed. So it's like one of these massive get out of jail moments. And I mean, the organisers were obviously not pleased at them, but he was like, they honestly were both so relieved and so amused at how fucking ridiculous the situation was.
That is wild. I love it.
So career highlight for the lols.
Great.
So 10 years after the previous recording, they bring out Renaissance Men in 2019. This is number 5 in Ginger's list, which is pretty high up. I've actually seen this one really fondly appraised on the fan channels, many of them in a Scottish accent. There was a good band vibe at the start of this project taking shape. Danny in particular was apparently in a really good place and playing well. Ginger though said that he had, well, describes it as the worst time in his life around about this point. It doesn't go into detail about what it was that happened. Maybe fans know, I don't. But at some point he loses his voice and he has to take time out of the recording to try and recover. And when he came back to the studio, he said the vibe had totally changed. The momentum was totally gone. He thinks the engineer on this record did an amazing job because apparently, and it's not obvious, but apparently the engineer basically cut this record together from bits and bobs of demo recordings, what they'd managed to track, a few overdubs. He said it's a total Frankenstein's monster of a record, but the guy did such a good job that it doesn't really show. And it is ironic that it was so well received by fans as a result. He's surprised at the positive reviews given the nature of how it came about. Although he does acknowledge that, like, for example, Fine Art of Deception is one of his favourite Wildhearts tunes of all time. There's a couple of really great songs on here. But he's like, the way it came into being was pretty desperate.
Well, I think Dislocated was one of their highest charting songs, certainly of the later period, if not ever. It was that single which did really well, and I think this record actually performed quite well in the charts as well. But in 2019, that's quite different from 1994. But
their fans had aged to a point where they had loads of disposable income. Yeah. The kids were away to uni, you know what I mean?
Aye.
College.
It's very much what's that. It's like Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter by Iron Maiden when they release it at Christmas, when there's nothing in between Christmas and New Year, and then release it in 4 formats, so it definitely goes to number 1, that kind of thing. But at the inverse of that, and the fact that it takes so little record sales now compared to the past.
Yeah, that's true.
To get on the charts.
True. Yeah.
Dislocated is a good song. It's just a shame it's almost fucking 6 minutes long. It's 3 minutes too long, boys. Kind of Motorheady grit to the vocal, maybe because his voice wasn't in the best place, like you said there. Let Them Go is like proper Wildhearts. The chorus is quite simple, but I really like the energy of it, and the main riff in My Kind of Movie was also pretty cool. They
follow that in 2021 by 21st Century Love Songs. Now 2021, you may recall, was hot in the back of COVID. That had really fucked things up for the band, as it fucked things up for most of the world. This is number 8 out of his 14 record list. They do point out that the quote classic lineup, that sort of Earth versus the Wildhearts classic lineup, only ever recorded 2 records. One of them was the aforementioned record, and one of them was this. But it isn't quite as simple as that, because this was all basically tracked independently, not as a band. They weren't in there rocking out and having fun the way they had with Earth Versus. Ginger had also, just prior to COVID, just been done for ABH, actual bodily harm, after leathering a guy in Ireland after a gig. I think the guy fell and hit his head in a fire extinguisher, was pretty badly hurt. Ginger got done for it and got 3 years suspended sentence, so he couldn't have toured anyway. But obviously COVID made that an impossibility. He said that he met up with Danny McCormick for it, and quote, Danny was a skeleton with no teeth and that was a shock. Danny and CJ basically just didn't know the tunes at all in advance of recording, so it was all done individually. It was quote, anything but a band. It was a fragmented nightmare. There are some great songs, but it was a miserable time.
Yeah, it's lacking energy. It feels fairly forgettable, to be honest. And I hadn't listened to that much of only the first part of the
interview thing.
The interview thing you're talking about. But that does certainly go some way to explaining why this record kind of doesn't really work.
Yeah.
David, police are on their way. Whatever you are today, they'll take it away.
It is amazing the number of their albums that actually were really unpleasant experiences when you really kind of start putting them into piles, you know. And so the only other record is the record that came out this year.
Friday Just There?
Yeah, Friday Just There. Satanic Rites of the Wildhearts. And unsurprisingly, maybe second in Ginger's list of 14 Wildhearts albums.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, recency bias, I would say. This shouldn't be up there in those rankings, and it probably won't stay there over the course of time. But you know, we've talked about it on the show before. When artists do this kind of back catalogue thing, miraculously their most recent record suddenly appears near the top because they're so energised about it. Hey, it may be a good record, it may end up in the top 5. I just think it's unlikely that it'll stay at number 2. I mean, we touched on it in the first episode when we were talking about Danny and talking about CJ and their various mental health struggles. Ginger had been sectioned prior to this. He spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward. I think he described coming out of there with like a brand new hatred for music, saying he couldn't listen to it or even read about it. He just did not want anything to do with music for a long time. I've actually personally been through something like that as well in my life. I remember a good best part of a year where I was just absolutely disengaged from music. Just really very, very odd experience. But yeah, he went through that. And then one day he said that these tunes just started occurring to him in his head. Wee ideas just started popping into his head. Couldn't ignore them, had to kind of jot them down. Then more came. And I noticed in one of his interviews he was actually asked about his songwriting process, and he came up with a colourful analogy of like people that try and write to schedule. It's like just going into your toilet and trying to take a shit. It's like you get really frustrated, even do yourself a fucking injury trying to make it happen. It's like you're not ready for a shit. Wait until you're ready for a shit. And so I think that's kind of what he said happened here. It just suddenly, he was just like, I'm inspired, I've just got music in my head, and it came back to him, and this is what came out. I think he actually said that he wrote the tracks pretty much in the order that they ended up appearing on the album. He did say he approached CJ and Rich about doing the record. He got no reply from CJ, who in a different interview that I'd seen recently said that they weren't on talking terms, but he got a flat no from Rich. Ginger acknowledges that they had disconnected from him, and that he also sort of understands why. Danny did attend the sessions. There must have been some sort of reconciliation there after the drama around the biography, but he couldn't play. But he said he did like the album as it was taking shape. Ginger says this is basically the only album sessions he's done since the very, very early days that had no problems in the studio, and hence he said maybe it's higher up in the list as well because he's got such fond memories of that part of the experience.
I didn't have a chance to spend any decent time with it.
I listened to it. It's totally passable. It's definitely on a par with a number of those kind of, you know, Renaissance men and maybe 21st century and stuff like that. It's fine. It's not essential for me, but I'm sure the diehards are very happy with it.
It feels like he's very much leaning into his Geordie accent on that one.
Yeah,
the new one.
Maybe he is. Takes me a bit of a run up to do a good Geordie accent, so I've tried to sidestep it on this so far for want of doing it badly. And that only leaves Fishing for Luckies to be looked at in a little bit of detail. Now, increasingly, we've tried to avoid going into individual songs in the podcast to not be too exhaustive, but I'm afraid I have kind of gone into each track on this one because I think there's a reasonable reason for doing so. In terms of the record, I mean, I've, again, to specify, 1996 reissue, the one with the funny fish cover. By the way, some of those covers have got that kind of hologram thing so you can tilt them and stuff. None of the cover arts are that great. Whatever version of this you have, I think the fish is probably the best of a bad lot. Ginger placed this as number 12 out of his 14 albums. He did acknowledge that I think he was actually, some fans were watching him as he was doing it. It was maybe part of some live stream thing, and he said he was getting some funny looks. He acknowledges that a lot of people won't like that, but to him it is, quote, a fairly worthless album because it wasn't an album. As we said, these were the songs that the record company rejected, along with the fuck double album idea, and then suddenly they wanted them back again because they saw that the Fan Club release in 94 had gone over really well. He likes some of the tracks that were recorded for the 1996 edition featuring Jeff Stretfield. I think that was the only time they actually got to record with Jeff Stretfield. As I said, he's referred to it as a fucking posh bootleg. He did say, looking at the song list, I can see why you like it. This is him addressing the fans and that thing. But as a creative, that wasn't an album. It was a desperate cash-in by East West Records. Now, again, devil's advocate. If you're working for East West Records, you're like, this band are a fucking liability. They're a bunch of fucking maniacs. Maybe you should know what you signed up for, but also you've got to try and recoup, and maybe they just decided, fuck it, we'll take what we can get. I can also totally appreciate Ginger's side of that, which is that record labels were famous for taking the piss, and it would be very frustrating to have someone take your songs and release them without your go-ahead. That all said, for the vast majority of my time in my life that I've spent with this album, since I think 96, I was oblivious to any of that politics, and I think it's a fucking excellent collection of songs. As I said, my preferred version is not just due to the whole first exposure bias, the 96 version, the UK CD one. I genuinely prefer the song collection on it. Geordie Wonderland, for example, was on the original assemblage, and it just does nothing for me, tracks like that. And nothing that is missing from the 96 version was not replaced by a superior song, as I see it. I might have been tempted to agree with Ginger regarding the fact that the 94 version was, not an album thing, but the additions to this one, I think, genuinely improve the pacing and make it feel more cohesive, which is an achievement given the fragmented way it came about. In terms of the tracks, the first one, Inglorious. It's a bit of a fucking epic, and in their canon of songs, it's a really significant song. I love the overly earnest 80s picked rock intro. It's like Europe or Foreigner or something at the start before the riff kicks in. Thinking back though, in my memory, I felt like this song had more twists and turns than it actually does.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It has a few, but it's not as wild as I recall. And I think the fact that I have that impression probably illustrates how much a paradigm shift this album by Wildhearts was for me. So, like I said, I grew up with like Nirvana and Green Day and stuff like Everclear and bands like that, melodic, guitar-led, and their songs didn't really take wild deviations the way Wildhearts did. And so, I mean, Inglorious compared to those has loads of twists and turns and is really unconventional. And that, as I said, was certainly something I leaned into, much to my own band members' chagrin. The song overflows with just layered melody. I can completely see in retrospect how kind of Grey Race era Bad Religion shared my rotation with it. I think it has a lot of similar dense melodic qualities to that. Some of the riffs in this tune are also really odd. There's some big slides, there's some mutes. They made weird choices, but I think they made them really work. And despite all those US power pop moments and the riffs. It has that punky backing of like Sham 69 type gang chants and stuff.
Something fair, something good, something better. The 80s ever set the cast. Has come when the work is done. Intrigue, inglorious. We'll take a big stand.
That keep that sense of quintessential Englishness for me. Also, I think the thrash bit that kicks in after 4th minutes 30, I think it is, it totally kills. And that descent that it does into the really choppy angular guitar riff, I think that's tremendous. Still aged really well.
I quite like the opening riff. It's got a good shuffle to it, fun chorus, big hard rock energy for sure. The verses, for the most part, aren't really my jam, but they do a wee bridge before the chorus, and I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
The harmonies are really good. I said that in the last episode as well. They always get the harmonies really well done in all of their records. But the song is just too fucking long. Just too long. It doesn't need to be that long.
No, I was all over that. At this point. It goes straight into Sick of Drugs.
Which is not too long.
No, it's not. I mean, that was a great example of, concise songwriting on their part. It's that fucking iconic intro as well. Like, fucking love that thing. Love it when I hear it starting. I think this is one of the most enduring and flawless examples of power pop that I know, and I mean across the bands. I put that in the same category as Weezer and bands like that. I think this is a fucking excellent bit of songwriting. It's dripping with upbeat melody, despite the fact that I think, when you consider what they're singing about and the circumstances around it, it's got quite a dark heart. The line in it, "I've never met a junkie that I didn't like," always really stuck with me. And I think, see, the tambourine that they drop into the choruses is just such a fucking brilliant lift. It's just jubilant, and it's a subtle touch, but it makes all the difference in this tune. It colours the whole way I see the tune.
Yeah, the verses really remind me of Social Distortion. But I don't know if they would have been kicking around a bit when this song came out, or if, I can't remember the chronology, if they were maybe also an 80s punk band. But yeah, maybe that's kind of more of a Ramonesy thing. The intro is really great. I like the O's in it and the backing vocals in the chorus. The chorus itself is just all very, very good. It's very catchy. It's the best song on the record, probably one of their best songs, period.
Yeah.
I enjoy the brevity.
I bet you do.
I have nothing against long songs. I just think you need to work hard to make a long song interesting, and I don't think the Wildhearts work hard enough at that for my taste.
Okay. The third one, Red Light, Green Light. I mean, how more clearly can they express their admiration for the Beach Boys than that a cappella intro?
Red light, you're lonely, and nobody cares. I'm tired of hanging around.
It's another slice of pure power pop, but I think this one's a little bit more turbocharged.
Yeah, it's got a rancid energy to it, almost.
It does, aye. Great use of gang vocals and percussive claps in this one.
I put a CD in my stereo instead of taking the needle, and I could pour right in with the patience I'm with. It's in an ideal world. There'll be no time for ideas.
But do you ever see the video for this one?
No.
It's just two bulbs, a red light and a green light switching on and off. That's it.
Nice.
The whole fucking video.
Yeah, the bridge in the middle 8 has got that Ramonesy doo-wop backing vocal energy, which with the hand claps, which is really good. I think sometimes even his vocal melody choice will lean that way across a lot of their stuff. Maybe less so now, but when he wants to go hard at a catchy chorus, he'll kind of lean towards that Spectre-esque kind of, you know.
There is quite a Phil Spector like wall of sound to Wild Hearts, and especially this record, and I really like that back then. As I say, that's why, you know, so much for the Afterglow. Everclear has a sort of a kindred spirit with it, that maximalism. So Schizophonic, the fourth one, is one of the new batch of tunes that they recorded with Jeff for this edition. Chorus in this one's another monster for me. Ginger has said that he tends to write from the chorus backwards. He's like, if a song has a good chorus, you can make the rest of the song work. You know, for example, maybe with Inglorious, you're not a big fan of the verse lines, but he tends to work that way. Sometimes the verse is a means to an end of getting there. So great hooks in it, and I think very well used snare fills in Schizophonic in particular. I can actually live without the central refrain, you know, the actual word schizophrenic thing. I think that's maybe the weakest part of the tune, but I do accept that it lends itself well to that big kind of slowed down ending, and it needs that to be hinted at earlier in the song.
It feels like one of the weaker songs to me, to be honest. The riff isn't the best. The chorus is weaker than anything that comes before. It basically should have been over by about 5 minutes. It should have ended after the guitar solo.
Yeah, maybe.
This song didn't work for me at all.
Okay. Fifth one, Soul Searching on the Planet Earth. The chorus in that one feels closest to their first album for me musically, and it really works. It's not a personal favourite as a song, but I do, you know, in terms of fan service, and this is the Wildhearts. You know, this is from just after they finished Earth Verses when they were writing, so, and it sounds like that to me.
There's a really good riff that comes in at 2 minutes 25, and I like the lead guitar line of the chorus as well. It's a nice counter melody to the vocal, which I enjoy. I'm a big fan of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do the Channel Bop, the sixth one. I think it's a really strong slice in this album. I love the riff, and honestly that dun 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 dun. It's been lodged in my head since I heard it in the mid-90s. There's a kind of mild verse in this, but I think it's there to specifically accentuate the percussiveness of the chorus, including those weird muted off-time choppy things they do that don't seem to make any musical sense. Excellent, I love it. And again, at that age, listen to Everclear, Weezer, Weezer at times, you know, like Say It Ain't So had a couple of, like, you know, cheeky bits in it, but most of these bands weren't doing stuff that was really unorthodox timing wise. Wildhearts did throw some fucking wacky timing moments into their music.
Yeah. I think, the child-led part of the chorus is just such a good touch.
I was going to say that unlike Schizophonic, which I think has a similar idea, I love that all of the good boys and girls refrain. It really works in
Brilliant,
this one. And it sets up the ending so fucking well.
Yeah. I mean, this one's got a lot of different, really memorable, catchy vocal melodies in it. So it's just like packed so densely
It
with
is.
great vocal
Super
parts,
dense,
which
yeah.
is good. Schizophonic doesn't really do that, but this one absolutely nails it.
It's interesting as well, though, that in amongst all that melody, this is the one that gives a nod to their most metal side in the extended bridge. See, when they come out of that bridge into the upstroke section, I dare you to not bob your head to that. It's just a fucking great bit of writing.
Yeah.
Mood Swings and Roundabouts, number 7. The album definitely needed the adrenaline shot that this song gives it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I fucking love that OTT metallic squeal at the start. What even is that? Is that Van Halen or something like where that comes from? So fucking American hair metal. It's a pretty basic song, but it's just a really good pumping rock workout. And I will say, if you listen to it with this in mind, the oversaturated, really messy verses are a bit of a foreshadowing of Endless Nameless. Like, they were obviously fucking about with stuff in those, and I think it hints at what was to come.
Yeah, like you said, it needed that big shot of adrenaline. Actually, it sounds like it was recorded on speed or something like that.
Yeah.
And actually,
It
like
probably
that
was.
Yeah.
And like Flynn, the 8th one. Weird clunky verse in this one, and it gives way to an almost oi chorus. Another great showcase for the diversity of the influences behind their writing, regardless of, I don't think it's the strongest song, but I think it does bring together some really interesting elements to kind of explain how they've managed to keep sounding British when they have so many big American rock sounds.
Yeah, the verses are really interesting. They've got an alt metal feel to them. They sound a bit like Faith No More, actually.
Yeah.
Which I found was like, what? Where's that come from? But then, they cover Helmet, so clearly they're a fan of alt metal. The main riff of the chorus and the one in the intro are really, really good. There's a sonic difference in this recording as well. It doesn't sound as good as the other ones in the records. Clearly different sessions and different producers, I think.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things they don't like about it as well. Now, the writing's on the wall here. I can tell that Sky Babies is not going to sit well with you because it's 11.5 minutes long.
So do you want to know what I've said here?
Yeah.
My man, see, when I saw this song was 12 minutes long, my whole fucking heart sank. I do not want to hear a Wildhearts song that's 12 minutes long. I just don't want to hear it, man. There's no need for such self-indulgence.
And that should be right, except that is exactly wrong. This is arguably their magnum opus. It's nearly 12 minutes of riffs and hooks and fucking huge melodies. I could probably write as much about this one song as some of the entire albums we've done on previous episodes of this show. I will say, and I totally acknowledge this, having heard your take on this, one of the things that makes this song work for me is that I've heard this album so many times that I'm able to kind of parse this song. It's like listening to The Grudge by Tool, or listening to like Echoes by Pink Floyd, or like something like that, where you can overcome the length of it because you start to understand the topology of the song itself. And I think this song makes more sense to me now. Back in the day, it was impenetrable. I couldn't tell where I was in it. I didn't know if I'd moved on to another song yet. But now I can understand where it's going, and I'm able to go with it. I also, how do guys doing this many drugs remember this many time changes and key changes and chord changes in a fucking 12-minute track? How do they play this stuff? I don't get that at all.
Wanna know what I need to know when I see that we ain't in charge. Will the super power try to run it down? All alone, you're not alone.
It kicks into some really straight US college rock that reminds me of like early Fountains of Wayne or like Lemonheads or something like that. It's super simple, it's super catchy, and then at 1 minute 40 they're faced with a decision. We could finish this very catchy short single or we could veer off into fuck knows where for the next 10 minutes, and clearly they chose the latter.
Yeah.
They bring in a second major hook though at 2 minutes 40, which is just golden, and by 3 minutes we're into what could basically have been another entirely different but excellent tune. And then there's the riff, and then there's the shortened bars, then there's the staccato helmet riff. Then a bit later there's a prog bit, then there's a weird industrial bit. Then there's a galloping thrash metal bit, then they do another prog bit, and that gives away to this huge melancholy hook about 7.5 minutes, and we've still got fucking 5 minutes of the song to go nearly. And there's also a weird incongruous Beatlesy comedy voice clip just prior to the last big refrain. To be honest, maybe this will click with you, and go with me here. I am left with the impression of something that's quite Steinman-esque, Jim Steinman-esque, like an episodic rock opera, and a song that's a bit up its own arse but takes you on a journey. It's deliberately indulgent for the sake of theatre. I think there is a sense of narrative in it in that sense. I mean, we established that the Meatloaf tracks didn't really have a consistent narrative. I don't mean like a story, but I mean like they've chosen to do this for that occasion, like Meatloaf, maybe mixed with a bit of Weezer, maybe a bit with Iron Maiden, something like that. It's an ambitious tune, and I think it's just bags and bags of fun once you get to grips with the sheer scale of it. It's certainly repeatedly rewarding with melody throughout. If it thinks you've gone too long without something to dose you, it doses you and then goes back into another wee indulgence. I really like it. But I can completely get how someone who doesn't traditionally like long songs is put off by that, and especially someone that's not had a chance or the inclination to sit and hear that song regularly to become accustomed to it, it would definitely bounce off them. So I get that. I don't think it's unreasonable. That's just the gamble they took when they made those decisions. And then they finish it with Night Songs, and again, on this edition of this album, I like that decision because Sky Babies is a very draining experience. I think Sky Babies, Ginger had mentioned that it was originally maybe going to close Fuck, or it was intended to close Fuck, the double version. But I think there's something really great about this blissed out, dreamy acoustic thing ending this collection. I think it works because it's not an essential song in itself. It's fine. It's not really much to write home about, but it's really effective sequencing because it brings the album to a nice landing. It slows and rests, and that's it. And it's 10 tracks, and I love that.
Yeah.
My conclusion regarding Fishing for Luckies, again, bearing in mind the Ginger may well at some point listen to this, as a band, I think Wildhearts seem to have just scraped below the big time, the truly big time. They're not to be sniffed at, but they are not on the really big stages.
I'd happily be in a band like the Wildhearts,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, In terms of scale,
Yeah.
not in terms of drugs and mayhem.
Well.
Was that because of their personal habits and constant feuds? Maybe, yeah. I think that's certainly a lot of articles, a lot of journalism over the years has put it at that door. I also think they, and by they I mainly mean Ginger, failed, and I think you'll deal with this quite well here, failed to condense their abundant ideas into little packages that could be weaponized as hits. You know, they had multiple hits in this back catalogue. Had they been more ruthless and chopped these songs down, maybe had a radio version and an album version, and had some of these are like Sky Babies has 2 brilliant singles in it, at least in the context of that one tune, and half of those potentially great singles are often like sort of bifurcated by these metal workouts. You know, it's like if the single was there and then the metal thing erupted out the middle of it, it reminds me of watching like a John Carpenter Creature feature, like the thing when it bursts out of the guy, you're like, oh no, just leave it be. Or it's because the ones they did try and keep, you know, short and sweet, I think we mentioned this as well, it just so happened that for me, those ones that were short and sweet, with the exception of Sick of Drugs, weren't the ones with the best hooks. I think the best hooks are hidden quite often in the longer tunes, and the ones that they did sort of use as flagship singles weren't often the best songs. And, you know, like we said about Earth Verses or Fuck, there's not that many choruses for those albums that really still stay with me, whereas there's multiple moments in this that I could happily sing to you. So, yeah, and also the problems with the labels didn't help them, as it led to the band having very half-hearted attitudes towards promotional efforts. But, as we say, not meaning to shill for the man, but fuck being a label trying to plan for a Wildhearts release given the unpredictability of the band and the band members. But it's an album with more great riffs than most bands manage in a career. I understand Ginger's personal beefs with it, but as a collection, I'm sorry, Ginger mate, if you hear this, you're too close to the picture, in my opinion, to see it for what it is. It is a fucking brilliant collection of brilliant ideas. It's not perfect, but I certainly think it's as good as I heard from a British rock band of that era. One, you know, the Brit rock movement, that alternative movement, that era of like big Kerrang, kind of grungy. Nothing was as good as this, I don't think. The fact that it got there via a few iterations and maybe a fair share of luck is really neither here nor there. As a kid, hearing it with no preconceptions, I can just confirm that it was superb. I'm confirming that for you, Ginger and bandmates. So you'll just need to learn to live with that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we finally got to spend time with the Wildhearts.
A lot of time.
Yeah. I always feel like a bit of a blind spot to me.
Yeah. I was just always a bit intimidated by taking it on. It's one of those ones, you know, it's a bit of a mountain. Yeah,
but we got there in the end. I think this collection actually shows a really good summation of what the Wildhearts do well and whether excesses are truly excessive. And you're either into that or not. I do wonder if there's maybe a part of me which just hasn't spent enough time with them in general to fully appreciate the way they write, you know?
Yeah.
But I feel as though there's probably a lot of songs in there that I would potentially enjoy if I could spend more time with them. But I'm now at an age where I'm probably either A, going to go and find something else, and try and get that, A, you know, take my fancy, or B, just go back and listen to things that I like. Although this year I've been doing a stupid thing where it's actually made easier with the podcast, to be fair, but listening to at least one brand new record to me every day, at least once. And I've come across some really good stuff by doing that. Would I want to do that with every Wildhearts record? Would I have chosen to do that? Probably not.
I don't think you should with every... well, I don't think they all merit it, but I definitely think this one does. So it's interesting to me as well, because, for example, if we were on a lengthy road trip, I would love the opportunity to sort of, you know, as we're putting tunes on, curate certain Wildhearts tunes, because the thing is, when I listen to them, I frequently think, Mark would fucking love this bit. Like, there's so much in this bit, or there's so much in that bit that is so up his street. Like, that's a great riff, that is a brilliant bit of melody, that's got loads of layers of this, and there's so many moments in it that I am convinced you would be so warm towards. In fact, in a lot of it, probably even more inclined to like it than me, because I think it often aligns with what I perceive as some of your tastes more closely than it does with some of mine. The problem is, I appreciate as well, though, that it's often delivered in these kind of bloated workouts, and there's so much of it, it's hard to know where to start. Sometimes it feels a bit dated. Sometimes the delivery's a bit crap, like, you know, because of the misery that they went through in the process and all that kind of stuff. That it's navigating it, and as you say, as you get older, you kind of have less time to fucking burn doing that. But I genuinely believe there's a lot of stuff in Wildhearts in this album, but also dotted in and around it, that it just feels to me so much like something Mark would enjoy. But I sympathise with the task of trying to dig that out. But yeah, I mean, Sick of Drugs would be the first one. If we were in a car going somewhere, I would be like, Mark, check this tune out.
Good song.
And the thing is, that is an inroad and says, look, there's much, much, much more of this if you're willing to mine for it. The problem is, with Wildhearts, you quite often have to mine for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's not stopped me in the past, like getting into bands that I maybe was not hugely into before and kind of came away feeling lukewarm with. Susie and the Banshees being a really great example of that. Gojira as well. I mean, I had heard from Master Series before because Danny's a big fan, and it wasn't until I spent time with discography and I find myself regularly going back. So yeah, I do feel as though there's probably something here that I will want to go back and listen to, because yeah, it's amazing how when you step away from something, and it's probably a wee bit of behind the scenes and non-process, when you step away from something, it can be odd, the things that go, actually that's still stuck in my head and I don't understand why.
Mate,
you know?
The perfect example of that is the fact that to this day I still listen to that fucking Burials album by AFI. I mean, why the fuck do I listen to that album? I don't like AFI, but that, I mean, recently, I think it was a couple of years ago, that was my number one played record on my Spotify Wrapped. I'm like, why the fuck do I like this album? That just stuck. And I do think there's an element of that could be there with Wildhearts for you. I really do.
No promises, but I do have my playlist now, so all the songs that as I do whenever I'm going through any artist, I always do the unsung playlist, which is all the songs that just jumped out to me on every single record. And I do have that, and it's an hour and a half long, you know, and it doesn't actually contain anything from this record, because this was the last thing I listened to, and then it was the notes, and I never really put the record on that we're doing. Well, I probably should be more diligent with that,
especially if I'm the one recommending it.
Yeah, well, I do listen to that obviously and do the notes on it, but I don't know why. I think it's because it's always at the end of my journey, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the destination.
And the thing is, with a band like this, you're liable to be a bit burnt out, more so than normal.
It's not an active choice, it just wasn't what I was thinking about when I was listening to it. You know, I was thinking about, I need to think about the songs. So
Wildhearts punters, you're a passionate bunch, so please feel free to get in touch. There's a couple of holes in our research there. There's a couple of things we're unsure about. We're more than happy to have them eliminated. If we made you heavy bulk with the story at the start, I apologise, but trust me, I went through the exact same. Yeah, I mean, thanks for listening. Yeah. Mark, bit of admin, you like this podcast?
If you like this podcast and you don't like ads, then the place to go is patreon.com/unsungpod. For £4 a month, you get early access to episodes with no ads. You get access to us. Not that we're hard to access, but
to be honest, I think venting your spleen is more appealing than no ads, because you get to be like, yous were wrong or yous were right, and if you join at the lowest level, you get onto the AAA group, and that means we can interact directly as a little collective community where people do suggest albums to us and we cover them from time to time.
And Kindagger recently was a suggestion on the group.
Yep, absolutely.
And we do have a master list of suggestions at the moment, which we are regularly just kind of jumping into and thinking that would be quite interesting. So.
So there's options there, and you can go up to the record club tier where we send out a record every month that we've bought direct from an independent band or label, so they get money, we get money, and you give yourself a wee present, as well as all the other associated benefits. So check out Patreon.
Yep. And if you just want to do us a solid, all our socials at UnsungPod, give us a share. Just share this episode.
Mentioned it last week. Wildhearts is one of those bands. We're an older audience, and that makes us more likely to be part of a Facebook group. And if you're in a Facebook fan group or a Brit Rock fan group or whatever, and you think we did an okay job of this, or you think folk will be fucking gunning for us, then put us up there. Stick us above the parapet. We're big boys. We'll take it.
Yeah.
We've said worse things in the past.
We have.
Can't be any worse than Biffy Clyro's tour manager.
Yeah, totally. And on that note, next week, what we're doing?
We are going to do Cryptopsy.
Whispers of
fucking Cryptopsy, and that is a daunting task as well, man.
Yeah.
It's not as melodic a week as this one. But yeah, we'll be bringing in Joe McGlynn again.
From Go Down Fighting. Man Must Die. Shit You May Not Have Seen podcast.
Aye. The only man with a more Scottish accent than Mark.
Well, he does have one of the most Scottish accents.
So Joe will be joining us, and he knows Cryptopsy fairly well. Cryptopsy, who I believe are out on the road in May. with Decapitated.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll be digging into that. It's tough tune and Cryptopsy music, but it sounds pretty good. I'm not all that familiar, but I will get there.
We will, yeah.
Okay, so see you for that one. Thanks for listening.
Bye.